The next thing I wanted to talk about before we get to breaking down the main card are the rule changes that were most recently made. So the first one is the 12-6 elbow is going to be made legal. And I think these rules take place, they'll actually take effect in November, but they were voted on and passed, right? So the noon to 6 elbow is going to be allowed again, so you can bring that elbow straight down. And obviously, the most famous case of that is John Jones, right? That's the only loss on his record is because of that noon to 6 elbow in a fight that he was very clearly winning. And there have been people for, I mean, how long now that have been advocating for that rule to be removed and for the noon to 6 elbow to go. So there's going to be a lot of happy folks with this one. I've heard Daniel Cormier say that on air that he thinks it should be illegal just because of like, it is just such like blunt force. I can understand why it's not like visually appealing to see. But if you think about all the ferocity you can get, like Joe Rogan talks about this all the time, but how much leverage and ferocity you can get by bringing your elbow this way and putting your body weight behind it. I mean, I don't know. There is something, in my opinion, though. I do see DC's point about just like that blunt force trauma. I feel this like I'm not so like, obviously, if you're watching MMA, you're oddly like a fan of this violence, right? Like you're waiting to see these people get knocked out or submitted or whatever. And if the fight is exciting and they're going back and forth, that like, you know, but at the same time, rules being in place, like you always hear the discussion about elbowing guys in the back of the head and shit like that. Like if you take their back, and yeah, you can make the argument too that if you throw a head kick, it wraps around and hits the back of the head. But in my opinion, it's about the line of sight, right? Like you have a direct line of sight at the back of the person's head where they have no chance to defend and you can throw elbows. Whereas if a head kick wraps around the back of someone's head, at least they're facing you and they have a chance to defend for that, right? So there are certain rules in place that I think are there for a reason and that I think could result in more devastating injuries if they weren't in place, right? But I'm not so certain the noon to 6 is one of them. And it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out because people are obviously going to utilize it, right? Is it going to be, if the argument that this is more powerful and more effective, you would think that people are just going to keep throwing their slicing elbows. So we'll see how the noon to 6 comes into play, though. We'll see how often it's used, if there's effectiveness, right? If it is deemed to end up being too dangerous. But if your argument is that this is more powerful and effective anyway, I would think that most people are just going to use this anyway, right? But I don't know. We'll see. It's probably good overall that it's banned. It's one more technique that fighters can use. But the most important one, and one that I definitely agree with, is the rule changes they made to a down fighter, right? So you can't just be, if you're like on your feet, you can't just put a hand or both of your hands on the mat anymore, right? Like it has to be a knee that's down or another part of your body other than your feet, right? And you will see guys so often they get caught in that position, like that front headlock position, and they just throw their hands to the mat. And then the guys are trying to like lift them up off the mat and time the knee, and it results in these. You kind of saw that in the Arnold Allen versus Evloev fight, right? Allen fights this weekend. That's a good example of it. But I like that if you're in a vulnerable position like that, you should be able to take advantage of that, right? And again, line of sight, you're facing your opponent. Granted, your head's facing down, but you're at least facing them. Right. And I just think it is such a cheap way to get out of being in that bad position. Like you should have to have a little bit more urgency and find a different way out if a guy can knee you in the head. Knees on the ground, I don't know. I feel like you're actually more well suited to like kind of like cover up and bring everything in tight with the knee on the ground. So I don't know. But either way, it's a step in the right direction. And I think that it's a big rule change, and I think it's going to change a lot of things. Like the fact that guys can't hang out there anymore is going to force them to adapt, right? That's the thing about like one implements some of those rules where you can like knee a grounded opponent, right? But I don't know. I just think it's something that the fighters will have to adapt to, and it's another thing that they'll have to add to their arsenal. Like you can't just rely on putting your hand down anymore. Find a valid way out. So I think that's a great rule change. I think that's going to be much more impactful than the noon to 6 elbow, right?